Well, didn't take too long to basically show how soon it took for Vince McMahon to be a scumbag. Yep. Episode 2 of the Vince McMahon Docuseries is called Heat. It talks about wrestling in the 80s, and then it starts to dig, well, it goes into, like, scandals. Basically stuff that was, of course, reported by Phil Mushnick, who is another reporter who had it out for Vince McMahon and the WWF. And it ended where the WWF kind of went through a slump in like the early to mid 90s. Until basically when they were able to start outdoing WCW, when it went to the Attitude Era and whatnot. But yeah, so there was definitely some things in this episode that, like I said, didn't take too long to basically expose that Vince McMahon is just a scumbag. And how ego got to him very, very quickly. Especially protecting some guys that he basically felt was best for business to protect. Such as a Jimmy Fly Snuka. And looks like also, quite possibly, Patterson as well. But, we're going to get into this episode and talk about what all that they talked about in episode 2, again, which was called Heat. And also, I gotta just... There was one line he said when they were talking about the scandals that I'm sure myself and many others who have watched this docuseries had to go back and listen to it how many times, because you were just like, did he just say that? Did he really just say that? And it's a line that, again, I reiterate, as I've mentioned at the beginning of this series and in other videos I've done. I cannot sit here and say Vince McMahon is guilty, for sure, of his accusations he's had in recent years. But the way he responds, the way he acts, the way he doesn't even take it seriously, and this line he said just summed it all up, where I said, I have every reason to believe that he is capable of being guilty of these accusations. But again, he has not formally been proven guilty, but I can see him being guilty. So, let's get into it. So, I thought they were going to jump right into the scandals. They did not. They talked about wrestling in the 80s to start off with. After they start off with this, I can't remember what it was called, but some music video Vince did where he even started singing and dancing and whatnot. And it was weird. Vince McMahon thinks he is like a god when he touches everything. He isn't. He's not a talented singer. He's just, again, he just has a full ego. Yes, as we learned in episode 1, he gambled on a lot of things, trying to, like, bring pop culture and much more, everyday life things into wrestling to draw an audience. Which I saw that, I'm like, that's a smart business decision. In this episode, of course, we even see, too, he started making things very goofy, trying to make it more of like a variety show, rather than just sticking to its main concept, wrestling. And by the way, also, they've said it in the first and the second one, even though it's true, I do hate that they also compare this to as a soap opera. It's like, okay, like, it's not, there's drama, but I don't know. Soap opera always seems like too far of a stretch with comparing it to professional wrestling or sports entertainment. But, anyways, so I think we learned back in episode 1. Vince McMahon, of course, wanted his top guy to be Hulk Hogan. And he was relying on him, of course, to draw in the big views. Now, when Vince started trying to do some other things like a variety, trying to, draw in a bigger audience as he tried to grow the business more, he took a chance on Wrestlemania 2 with having it take place in, like, 3 different cities on the same night. And it didn't work out. Again, I've only seen Wrestlemania 2 one time. It didn't work out, unfortunately. And because of that, Vince's like, okay, well, if that didn't work, why can't I take a gamble on trying to sell out, like, a bigger stadium? which is what led to the idea of WrestleMania 3 being at the Silverdome in Detroit. And yes, I know they've fudged the numbers how many times with different shows over the years with attendance. They said that they did sell it out for 93,000, when in reality people claim it was like 78,000 or something like that. I don't know, but at the time, that's still amazing. And I didn't know this. Well, there's a couple fun facts I didn't know about this WrestleMania 3 main event. First off, well, what was not too obvious, that Andre the Giant was in failing health. And he was having back issues, and Vince McMahon tried to talk Andre into having back surgery to be able to be in the main event of WrestleMania, and him and Hulk Hogan was going to be the match that was going to draw in the fans to fill up that arena. And he got the surgery, and we all, in fact, know that they did succeed. What I also didn't know until watching this episode of the docuseries is that Hulk Hogan did not know he was going to win until Andre didn't kick out. He did not know, which obviously, again, was smart and a great way to make things more realistic. Especially also with the fans still at the time who, again, we already know that they're trying to expose wrestling as fake, but there's still fans who did believe this was real. Especially when we get to one of their little, iffy things that they got in trouble for with the whole storyline with Sergeant Slaughter later on down the line they talked about. But yeah, WrestleMania 3 was a huge success. As far as, proving that they can draw a bigger audience in one big building, rather than spreading it out through 3 different cities in one night, which, again, this did not work out. One big building with a bunch of people, I think, was a great success, and a great mark for them as well. However, this is where dark times started happening for wrestling. Well, first off, with the increase in popularity was leading them to doing more shows. Nowadays, of course, different wrestling companies, it depends. Even when Vince was around before, I think you had 2 or 3 days off during the week, but you're on the road for house shows, doing different loops. And yes, I think you still don't have health coverage and whatnot. Where back then, with how popular it was, with how much the WWF had taken over all the different territories, there were people who were working 52 weeks a year, 7 days a week. Never home to see their families, which is absolutely, of course, ridiculous. Yes, we appreciate these fans putting their bodies on the line for us for as much time during the year as they can, but everybody deserved that time with their family. And I didn't know this either, but that's kind of the reason why a lot of people were leaving the WWF to go to WCW when it first formed in the early 90s. Because they were doing less dates, but still paying you a lot of money. And I don't know if they were unionized, but WWF has never been unionized. And, basically, if you were in the WWF, you were not getting time off unless you were injured. And if you were injured at the time, you didn't get paid. Of course, now, there's some people, well, Vince, of course, but some people now, Tony Khan, who is extending contracts because they're adding on injury time, which is what Tony Khan right now is doing to the Lucha Bros. But, with all that being said, though, so there was that issue. Then, as we reached, the early 90s, even though, of course, people still loved him, people were also getting sick of Hulk Hogan. They wanted someone new. They wanted something different. They tried at WrestleMania 6 when they had the Ultimate Challenge, Ultimate Warrior, and Hulk Hogan title versus title, with Hogan putting the world title on the line and the Intercontinental title on the line with the Ultimate Warrior. Warrior won, Unfortunately, though, trying to make Warrior the guy did not work out. So they felt they had to go back to Hulk Hogan. And I believe it was, WrestleMania 7, WrestleMania 8, whichever one it was. They had that feud with Hulk Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter. At the time, I believe it was the Gulf War that was going on. So they tried to make Sergeant Slaughter from like an American lover to worshiping Iranians or Iraqians, whichever one it was that was going on at the time. And it got very controversial that, of course, WWF, of course, was getting, Sergeant Slaughter, I think, was getting death threats, I think, and other stuff, which was, of course, way too far. He was just playing a character. But it was that controversial that it, again, unfortunately, just people were like Phil Mushnick, who we talk about later on, who had it out for Vince McMahon, was writing, of course, reports trying to expose flaws that are being found or said about behind the scenes in the company. Because that's the thing this time. Although we were seeing like a lot of great things on TV, behind the scenes, things were there was like a lot we didn't see, but it's like you started seeing behind the scenes, and it's kind of like, what is this place actually going on here? Which, of course, again, between longer schedules and then obviously Vince McMahon having his preferences, having different preferences as far as, wrestlers' looks and whatnot, led to people. Now, Vince never told people to take steroids. But during this time, back in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a lot more drugs that were made illegal, and for reasons why, yes, I know there are prescription drugs, but there's a lot of people who have resorted to drugs for not the right reasons. That's why Ronald Reagan eventually was illegalizing drugs. At the time, it's kind of like, well, I've been doing this all this time, now all of a sudden I can't. It's like, I can't, to other people, I need this job, I need this look, I can't change my methods. And Vince, of course, was put on trial for that. Yeah, this and other trials, apparently he was wearing a neck brace, which people believed was him trying to get sympathy, which did it work or not, I don't know. Of course, there's a lot of people, it's like a typical heel on TV, who would wear the neck brace to try to, get sympathy. And apparently also Vince tried to bribe jury members or whatnot to get out of this, even though, again, he really wasn't guilty with that. The person who was probably the most guilty with all that, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, was Hulk Hogan, because he denied he ever used any sort of steroids. Which, of course, was not a good look on the company as well, especially with him being their top guy. And again, they of course tried to go back to Hulk Hogan as a top guy in the feud with Sergeant Slaughter. It didn't work out, and even Hulk knew as well. So that's why it was in 92 or whatever it was, he left the company. And he, at the time, was not planning on ever wrestling again. He wanted to do Hollywood. He got bored by Hollywood, though. And then, of course, he got offers from, I believe, Eric Bischoff and Ted Turner. And he went to WCW. Which was a huge slap in the face for Vince. And actually, I think that's the last thing they talked about before the documentary ended. Whenever he was going to testify against Vince McMahon with all the other scandals going on. But not just the drug scandals, but even the allegations against certain actions other people did as well, that I know they briefly touched on. And also, funny thing was too, and this is kind of like a reminder about, Vince McMahon trying to justify a lot of things. During the time when the steroid trial and error was going on, Vince McMahon, like I said before, was trying to make things like a variety show. We eventually saw stuff like the XFL or the Brawl for All, and I'm sure a few other things. Dear Lord, of course, some things just don't mesh with wrestling. And again, I get why Vince was trying to do these variety things, but after a while, you had to look back on it and say, it doesn't work with wrestling. It's like, How many wrestlers was he trying to do comedy with? Comedy is not for every single wrestler. It isn't. But Vince kept insisting, and, you know, he beats himself to death. It's always like beating up a dead horse. I love water. But then, but anyways, so during that time, Vince was trying to start like a bodybuilding program because he liked bodybuilding, and he was calling it the WBF. Of course, it didn't go through, and he claims the reason why he pulled the plug on it because it wasn't a good time because of the steroid scandal. Even though we could all agree, like the XFL, the WBF was not going to be anything special, unfortunately. So that all went down and happened. Am I missing anything before I get to the scandals? I don't think so. So I talked about, you know, the rough schedules. You know, obviously, you know, Vince wanting the look and, you know, and other things that, you know, may have just driven some wrestlers to bad vices and such. And, of course, like, the trials went on. Of course, Vince McMahon, who always seemed to, like, settle with you know, these accusations and whatnot. People who accuse him with just money, which I'm just like, you know, you get sick of hearing people like that. Because like I said before, in my time as a wrestling fan, Vince McMahon just always came across as like that villain that you just one time wanted to see him screw up just so he can face the facts and know that, you know, hey, you can't get away with every single thing. As, you know, I just wanted to happen at some point. Just he'd get slapped with reality and see if it had any effect on him. But then, of course, there was, of course, the allegations they got into. There was, again, that reporter, Phil Mushnick, who was who basically just said in the interviews, you know, he hated Vince McMahon, and he wanted to basically expose him for what he was. And again, that led to, you know, some exposing of some allegations that happened in here. First off, we had the Ring Boy scandal, when they were bringing in young high school or college students, I think it was, to like set up the rings and whatnot. And there was a couple guys that would inappropriately take advantage of these people and against their will do things to them. I think it was Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin, who I believe were found guilty. But then there was also stuff about Patterson grabbing at boys and doing other things, even though Patterson openly came out. But still, if he was doing things unwillingly, that's no excuse. But out of the three guys, Mel Phillips, Terry Garvin, and Patterson, Pat was the only one Vince protected. Because he told Pat to leave. Pat leave, but then Vince hired him back to run creative again. Because he thought it was good for business. Just like he went to the police when Jimmy Superfly Snuka was accused of the death of his girlfriend, I believe it was. And all of a sudden, Jimmy Superfly Snuka is off the hook because Vince probably bribed him. Again, he's a ruthless businessman. Again, apparently he was calling jury members in the steroid trial to try to, you know, bribe them to prove him not guilty and whatnot. Especially, but that when I heard about that Ring Boy scandal that happened, I'm like, how on earth are they still in business after that happened? Like, that is just about as bad as years ago when there was that issue with Penn State with Jerry Sandusky, you know, being arrested, and other people who was covering up for him, including Joe Paterno as well. Like, that Ring Boy scandal could have easily led WWF out of business. I really believe it could have, but it didn't happen. But I did, of course, get suspicious, of course, when he heard he brought back Patterson. He thought it was best for business and whatnot, which, of course, was not good. We talk about Jimmy Superfly. And then, of course, the Rita Chatterton. So, Rita Chatterton was known as, I believe being the first female referee in wrestling. She basically was an Aubrey Edwards. But even she, came out and admitted that Vince McMahon himself forced her to do things she didn't want to do. And basically threatened her job and said, you have to, please the boss. And this is the part where I really got disturbed. Like, this is where I was like, yeah, Vince, you really are a scumbag. Because remember when I ranted about his interview when they first when they first sold the TKO, and how he basically laughed off and like, I've made a few mistakes, but I'm sorry. Like, you could tell he was full of shit and just not taking things seriously. Well, he had the same kind of response here. Because Vince McMahon said, if you've been accused of the R word, then you are one of them. An ist. I don't want to say the word, because we all know what the word is, but I'm just being cautious. But he was a perp, well, whatever. I don't know the right word to say to try to say it. But basically, Vince McMahon did things to Rita Chatterton that she accused him of. Now, you would think that if you actually believe you were innocent, you would just say, I didn't do it, keep your mouth shut. Don't go on and on showing you obviously know these things to prepare yourself to try to wiggle your way around it. Because Vince McMahon said that what they did was a consensual act. And even if he did, he forced her against her will, he said, well, the statute of limitations is up, so you can't get me anyway. I have watched every single episode of SVU. I have heard that excuse. It was consensual many times and just playing the system, trying to beat the statute of limitations. You cannot tell me there is that at least some of these accusations of Vince are true. First off, again, here's the thing too. Even if you did do something, consensual with Rita Chatterton, you're still a married man. So you basically are still risking, putting bad taste in your kids and your family's mouths to still admit that something happened. But he's still not, admitting he's guilty. He tries to justify himself to make himself the victim. And once again, he just doesn't take it seriously. And again, stuff like that, continues to make me believe that he is capable of these accusations he, in fact, has been accused of. Of course, at the end of all the episodes, they say Vince McMahon settled for this person. It's like, why? Because he can throw how much more money at them? Like, again, it just exposed that even back in, the 90s, Vince had an ego. Vince, of course, eventually would say he's out of touch, but then he would go completely senile and just screw things up. He just had to have everything his way. He had to have, yes, again, I understand why he was trying to bring in pop culture, but you're throwing risky things out there. Like, years down the line, he wanted to do a storyline where he was the father of Stephanie McMahon's baby. It's like, you don't need to do that. And if you're the one who's putting the ink on all this, why would you want to give yourself that bad of an image and people won't watch your shows anymore? Because even though, of course, WWE didn't completely, sink while Vince was still in charge, he was still basically asking for it. He pretty much was. So, yeah, they dodged so many bullets that Vince McMahon, again, somehow was able to get away with. Now, again, like I said, the steroid thing, I can't blame him. But other things, and even the Ring Boy scandal, he apparently tried to cover up for that Ring Boy scandal. Which, that makes me lead to you even more thinking you're even more disgusting because the fact that you were trying to cover up too. And again, you bribed to save Jimmy Superfly Snuka. You told Patterson to go away, but then, of course, he came back later. You can't tell me that there is some truth to these, at least some truth to these accusations. But we're starting to get into some of the more, deep details. I hope it continues on when we get to episode 3 next time. Guys, that is my thoughts on the second episode of the Vince McMahon Docuseries. Leave your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. Slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at The Club with the Man 93. You may also follow me on TikTok and Instagram at The Club with the Man 1993. I'll catch you guys in the next episode, episode 3. And please stay tuned for more as always. And subscribe to The Club with the Man 1993. I'm checking out. Have a great rest of your night, guys. And do not forget, in order to be superior to the man, you've got to be the man. And for I am the man himself. And that is not just an opinion, my friends. That is a fact of life. Yeah!